Right, rook versus two connected passed pawns. Strongly recommend you watch the rook versus two connected passed pawns 1 video, because we absolutely have to understand the basic ideas that we covered there in order to follow these harder positions well. Okay, so this video is going to be lots of harder positions in the rook versus two connected passed pawns, and we have to understand the tail hook, the switching pole positions, the way that if both kings are at the scene, the rook checking from the side, particularly control of that first rank, is a very powerful technique. And the way if neither king is at the scene, the two connected passed pawns on the 6th rank are unstoppable against the rook. So all of those ideas, they just need to be sort of knowledge that we can tap into and help us solve these harder examples. So this first example is black to play. It's a game from 1992. Pause the video and decide what you'll do here as black. Because you can see black's got a problem here. Okay, white has the two connected passed pawns. The black king and rook are in a reasonably good place to set up a tail hook here. And in fact, the fact that black can draw this game, even though white has this f pawn, shows that it would obviously be relatively straightforward to draw it were it not for this f pawn. Let's just go through the sort of the most obvious move, the move that surely we would all just play in time trouble, which is just take that pawn because it's a nuisance and just hope we've got time to set up the tail hook. And we kind of have got time to set up the tail hook if white pushes the b pawn. b7. In fact, I think we set up the tail hook almost with a move to spare. King c7, king d5, c6. Yeah, we had a move to spare. We can actually just play a pass at this point here. Rook b2. And yeah, what does white do? Here, this is just a complete draw. This rook is earmarked for the taking of the b pawn, and this king is just always going to stay in contact to take the c pawn afterwards. But the problem is that after this obvious king takes f4 move, white doesn't play b7 and let black achieve that tail hook. White switches pole positions, and black is stuffed. It's over. So we can't take the f pawn. What if we were to think, okay, let's come over and try and stop that switching of pole positions? Okay, king e6, and now in fact king b7 would be a draw. But white's not going to play. In fact, king b7, king d5 would transpose to the line that we needed to play. But white doesn't play king b7. White now plays b7. White doesn't need to switch pole positions anymore, because all we can do there really is pass, because the white king is shouldering us away. Black king comes into d5. Great, we've got the tail hook. But white's got a spare pawn. All black can do now is pass. There's no way the rook can leave the b file. There's no way the king can leave the hook onto that c6 pawn. It's got to stay in contact. And white just pushes the pawn. That's it. It's over. So what do we do? What do we do in this position? Because if we take the pawn, white wins by switching pole positions. And if we instead come over, white wins by pushing the pawn. And it's kind of like we sort of want to see what white's decision is. We haven't quite got a pass, so rook b2 doesn't do it, because we can't quite pass. We do need to move the king that way. So I hope I've done that the right way. We do need to move the king onto the e-file. Just sort of giving away the move already. Just in case white does one of those two plans. Yeah, so we can't pass, but we kind of like, we do want to pass with respect to taking the f pawn. Remember when we took the f pawn, if white just played b7, we could achieve the tail hook with a move to spare. So with respect to taking the f pawn, we do have a move to spare. We don't have a move to spare with respect to the switching pole positions plan. So we kind of need to get on with it. We need to sort of not take the f pawn in case white switches pole positions, but we also need to not take it straight away, because I forgot what I was saying there. But basically, we need to sort of play a sort of a waiting move, and the answer is King E4. So now, if White pushes the pawn, remember we had the tail hook with a move to spare, so we can just take the F pawn then. Like pushing the B pawn, White sort of made a decision. This was the thing back here. We want White to make the decision. Which pawn are you going to have in pole position? Because then we can go for what we're going to do. So King E4 is sort of a waiting move. You make the decision. There's your decision. Your B pawn's your pole position pawn. I'm going to come and take your F pawn. And we achieve the tail hook. Okay. If instead of B7, White's like, right, well, I'm going to play King B7. Then it was crucial that we'd move the king one file. I think that's that way. Sorry, I'm looking at it the other way, but I think it's that way. King D5, C6. Took me a while to work out which square that was. King C5, and there's just nothing White can do now. It's just a draw. Okay, King B7. We can actually just take the C pawn straight away there, and come over with the king. King D5. It's a draw. Great. So King E4, great move, and now whether White plays B7 or King B7, we've got it covered. But we also need to check, well, hang on, what happens if they play F5? Okay. By the way, this is what actually happened in this game. So the player with the black pieces back in 1992, very well done for playing King E4. And then, White pushed the F pawn. And you think Black's got the same problem because now you force Black onto the F file, but actually moving one rank this way was actually also another way to draw it. Okay, so if we took that pawn on F4, remember the original King takes F4 doesn't work, that's it, we were lost. But in the King takes F5 line, White switches pole positions, and the crucial bit is that we can now play Rook to C1, so that if C7 is played, we can get King to D7. We couldn't have got the King to D7 in the same number of moves starting on F4, so it was important that we'd gone one rank further up. In the actual game, I think White played King C7 there. Rook B1 is fine here, by the way, but Black also has this King D5, and the game ended like this. And they agreed to draw. Right, next, this is a game from 2002. I won't do a pause the video moment on this one, although obviously you're very welcome to pause the video and decide what you do here as White. It's White to play, and you can see that it's set up so that it's actually slightly more favourable for White. The black pawns are not so far advanced. We're already cutting the king off on the F file. And there is a sort of one of the techniques we covered in the other video, the first video I did on this, coming into this in a sec. But really, it's less formulaic. This one, it's just sort of have to think on the spot during the game, almost like a game of chess, in fact. So the first move is King E2, just get the king in. Or King E1 would have done it as well. We want to get the king to the F1 square. And if Black pushes the G pawn, if Black pushes their king, to stop you getting into the F1 square, their G pawn's gone, and that's clearly going to be a win for White. So instead, Black plays G4, and that has to allow you into the F1 square. But then Black could try and stop you getting into the G1 square. Now there's two winning moves here. One of them's slightly better than the other one, although, as I say that, the one that's slightly better involves, well, that's the one that's played in the game, and involves a trap that Black could set. Rook F4 straight away wins the game, because, well, if either pawn gets pushed, you can take the other one, and if king back to G3, Rook A4, and you've got this rook from the side delivering checks, possibly controlling an important rank in a minute. And yeah, you can see that Black can't do anything here. If they push the H pawn, we can get our king right in. That's checkmate in 20, apparently. But in the game, rook f2 check was played, which is also fine. King to h1, otherwise our king coming to g1, and then rook to f4, forcing black to make a decision. g3 would be a very bad decision. Rook takes h4 checkmate. So in the game, h3 was played. Now that's actually quite clever because that sets the trap. And we've just got to be a little bit careful here not to fall into a trap, which would be rook takes g4. Black pushes the h-pawn, and white does not have a move that doesn't stalemate the black king. The black king is stalemated by both the rook and the king at the moment. There's no way of playing a move that doesn't result in stalemate next move, other than losing the game with something ridiculous like rook g1 check. So yeah, not that. So you need to just be a bit careful, and yeah, we've got king f2. So the game went king f2, h2, and then any rook move along the fourth rank would do it. Rook e4, and black literally only has one legal move, and again has only one legal move. In fact, black resigned before playing those two one legal moves. Next, this one, yeah, this one's hard. I spent a long time thinking about this one. You should probably pause the video and do the same. It's black to play. What would you do? What would you do? There's a lot going on here. We've got the two connected passed pawns on the 6th rank, which, remember, would win against the rook by themselves. So in a way, there's no harm giving this rook away. Bit of a clue. But there is a little bit of harm in giving that rook away, because white's got a passed pawn, and that complicates matters. And white's threatening checkmate, which definitely complicates matters. So this a6 move sort of suggests itself, maybe not now, maybe on the next move. And you've also got rook h5 check, creating a pin on the b pawn, which might make a6 even stronger. So there's a lot of different possibilities going on, and it's not just a case of knowledge of rook versus two connected passed pawns. But if you've got that knowledge of rook versus two connected passed pawns, it's definitely going to be useful for not needing to analyse a lot of sort of the resultant variations. I mean, that's why for me, that's one of the main reasons we sort of study endgames, theoretical endgames, is that it just gives us knowledge that we can not have to bother going into it more than that. We can just see that that position has been reached, and it's like, well, I know that's a win, or I know that's a draw. So what did we decide to do here as black? Well, theoretically, or objectively, sorry, this game is a draw. Black has no way to win this. But there's one move that's a pretty good winning try. It was played in the game, and it won in the game. So first of all, if we take the c-pawn, that's a horrendous blunder. White takes back. You think, what's the problem? These are going to promote without the help of... I don't need a rook anymore. They will promote, but you know, white's still got this, and white's still got this checkmate threat. And in fact, that checkmate threat you have to deal with straight away by pushing the a pawn. You think, aha, now I've got him, because I'm going to be queening with check and then getting the other pawn to queen. It's fantastic. Even if white queens first, I'll still queen with check. But unfortunately, this is just completely one for white now. Rook b3, threatening checkmate again, and then picking off the g pawn. Once black plays, looks like king a4 is the only move there, in fact. So yeah, that's just completely gone. So don't play rook takes c6. If you try and do something exploiting this pin that I was talking about, rook h5 check, king c4, a6, it doesn't really do anything because white can pin your a pawn back with rook a7. And black's really got, because of the checkmate threat, black's really got nothing better there than just to keep checking back and forth. So that would probably end in a draw. I mean, if you take the b pawn, I guess we got the c7 push as well. Actually, let's just check that one. I haven't actually prepped that one, but rook takes, I presume, the c7 push, and we've even got ideas of rook takes a6. Yeah, that's one of the things that might happen. Rook takes a6 check, and then we're queening with check, and yeah, it could get very nasty for black very quickly. Engine's only got that as +3, but the point is black's now losing that. So not that. So the brilliant first move, as played in the game as well, is a6 check. And white hasn't really got much choice here other than to just pin that. And in fact, white's still drawing this if white pins that, as they did do in the game. But next comes rook takes c6 check. We saw in the game king takes c6. The problem with b takes c6 is that we now have got this g2 move. And we're queening with check. So, if rook g7, then we can play h2. We are going to be getting a queen there. Engine's got that as -5. So not b takes. And in the game, the player with the white pieces saw that and played king takes c6. Then black pushes the g pawn, g2. You could pause the video and decide what would you do here as white. It gets very complicated, unfortunately, and it's not easy to see why you should play the move you should play. In fact, it's very hard to see it. But in the game, white tried to set up a mating net with a3, and black has only one way to get out to escape that mating net. They've got to play king a4. So if you take on a6 straight away, the black king runs away. So the player playing white probably thought, well, that's no good, I'll play a3 instead. But after a3, king takes a4, we took on a6, and the black king still runs away. So the black king was going to run away, whatever. The question is, where did you want your pawn to be when the black king runs away? Did you want it to be on b3 with your pawn on a3, or did you want it to be on b4 with your pawn still back on a2? And the answer is the second one. So this is what happened in the game. Very, very hard to see why, though. g1 equals queen. So black's got a queen, but white's still got a rook, and it's going to be incredibly hard to stop that that b pawn queening. Not least because there's a rook b6 check followed by queening idea in there somewhere. So queen g6, clever move there. King c7. The rook can't be taken, or it can, but white just queens. So black carried on with the checks, queen f8, king c7, and then pushed the h-pawn. So the placing of the queen on f8 is very sensible because it guards the b8 square, but it also guards this h6 square, which white might want to bring their rook to stop the pawn. White's best move objectively here is just to queen and concede. You're going to have to try and defend queen versus rook, probably not holding on to this pawn for very long. But in the game, a rather clever defensive try was made with the idea that the f8 queen is overworked. Rook h6. Black shoved in this check, king c8, and then took the rook. And now white queens with check. But it's not difficult to find black's next move here. King a2. And this a-pawn has provided shelter for the black king. White could just resign there. In the game, queen e5 was played, hoping that, for h1 queen, and then what, actually, to be honest, there is no perpetual check there. That's still just massively winning for black. But black decided to bring their queen a bit closer to the defence of the king, and then play h1 queen on the next move, presumably, but white just resigned there. So yeah, a6 won the game for black, although objectively speaking it shouldn't have done, and yeah, really, really hard to see why. But it was crucially that when rook a7, all the same moves were played after g2, white should have played in this position rook takes a6 check, so the king runs away onto b4, and then you'd follow all the same moves as before, or if you did follow all the same moves as before, with this clever rook h6 idea. This time round, it's a draw, because the black king can't run away from the checks. In particular, we've got a queen coming down to b3. King a3 would obviously be a disaster there. So that was all a game from 1961. Lots of rook versus two connected passed pawns ideas going on there, but ultimately lots of other stuff. in the position, and yeah, you had to think about it. I mean, you know, shock horror in your games of chess, you have to think. Next, this is a game from 2005. It is black to play, and decide what you'll do. This is also pretty hard, actually. Pretty hard. So I'm not going to go into too much detail of what black should have done, because there's a knight on the board, basically. But black should play rook b4 and attack the f-pawn directly. So king e3. The secret is then to bring the king in. And there's lots of different moves here. It's just too much to analyse, to be honest. But we've just got an ending which is defensible. I mean, engine's giving 0.0. That doesn't mean it's a draw. That just means it's even. I would absolutely play on as white in this position and try and do something. Or maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I'll just chicken out and take a draw in case I messed it up. Knight takes f5, king c5, g6, rook b6, knight h4, king d5. That's just one possible variation. And you know, there's still more going on there, but white's next 5 moves, the 5 different options for white's next move, engine's just saying draw. All you need to do is win these 2 pawns somehow. You know, you don't mind giving up the rook in the process. There were also ideas back here, by the way, after rook b4, king e4. There's always, if this g-pawn gets pushed too early, there's always the chance of checking and coming behind if the white king tries to come over this way. But generally, the black king is going to be fine, just sort of getting over and helping out on the king side. In the game, what black decided to do, it looks quite clever at first. It looks like it actually defends the f5 pawn with the sneaky rook b8. So that when white takes on f5 with a knight, which they did, rook f8, knight has to move, you take the f pawn with check, and you're obviously going to be able to draw that by just, you know, you might even carry on playing for a win if white messes it up. But yeah, you can easily draw that. But in that sentence, or one of those sentences I just said, was the assumption that the knight moves, and that was the bit that maybe black forgot to think about. Oh. Okay. And that last move also now explains why this position belongs on this video. Rook takes f5, king g4, and we have a king at the scene, 2 connected pass pawns against a rook, and this king not at the scene. And yeah, this is how the game went, but it is just completely indefensible. g6, king b7, f5, king gets to the c file, but g7 already, rook g8, f6, and we cannot stop the white king getting to g6, which is a clear win. And yeah, black just resigned there. Next, white to play. Definitely worth pausing the video here and thinking about what you'd do. This is a real sort of practical, you could easily get something like this in your game, and there's something very important that you have to do here upon a bit of analysis of the position. In the game, f6 was played. Black played rook f1, just got the rook behind the f pawn. In the game, f7 was played, and black just took it. Rook takes f7, a2, b3 was also good, by the way. In this position, you can push either of those 2 pawns. They're just unstoppable. Rook to a7, b3. We can't even get the king up the board quickly enough to do any checkmate trickery. I'll be covering that in the next video, actually, sort of checkmate trickery to get the side with the rook out of trouble, checkmate threats, which is another concept to be aware of. This is how the game went. b2, rook takes a2, queen, and yeah, I mean they carried on from there. White played rook h2, trying to hold on to the h pawn, but after that check, king h3, king takes h7, then resigned. That looks very hard yeah, that looks extremely hard for white to defend. The king's already boxed in into the corner, so yeah, it's not going to take long. All right, I'm confident even I could win that as black against Stockfish and its resilience in queen versus rook. Just briefly going back to this point though, after the rook had come behind the pawn, I remember that if, on the theme of rook versus two connected passed pawns, remember that this move is the one that usually rounds up the pawns. But it's not the same this time round because black still has a rook left. It's true that these two pawns are paralysed, but yeah, black still has that rook left. So you could just take on h7, and the black king can be used to deal with the f pawn, and if this is taken, the rook is going to defend the queening of that pawn, so that you can't get the rook back to protect it. f7, king g7. Yeah, if the rook could be deflected away, then yeah, b3 would draw it. Sorry, if the rook was temporarily deflected away after the rook taken on b4. Am I saying that the right way around? Got confused what I'm talking about now. Oh yes, if the rook had been deflected away, white can take the b pawn. That's the point, because a2 and you can come back. But with the rook not deflected away and the king earmarked for the f pawn, the f1 rook stays on the first rank to defend the a1 equals queen. It's probably best I just didn't talk for the last 45 seconds. But hopefully, yeah, that will make sense. Anyway, so back to the original position. You can't just push the f pawn. You've got to stop the black rook getting behind that f pawn, and king g2 does it. So you know you're defending this. This pawn is temporarily paralysed. This pawn is temporarily paralysed. So you're sort of, black had nothing useful to do with their pawns, because whichever of those pawns moves, your rook can take the a pawn. And you've stopped them having a useful rook move now. So, you know, the plan is just to push this. Rook b2 check, king g3. At least black gets their pawn to a2. But then you go f6. And black's really just got nothing better than to queen and take that h pawn before it gets too dangerous for them. So yeah, 1944 that game was. And you absolutely have to play king g2. Right, next, and this is a game from 1972. It is black to play. Now this position actually ended up in endgame books for ages, in the days before computers, with the conclusion that it was a drawn position, and you know the endgame books went through the way in which it was a drawn position. So it's black to play. Black plays king f4. White can bring their king over, king d4. And black, I guess, has got a couple of choices here, both of which do lead to a draw. King f3, rook f8 check, king g2. We're just sort of trying to push the king off the board this way. White king can come into e3. h3, rook h8, and now if h2, we've got the tail hook. And if king h2, we can simply bring the rook back to g8, and after g2, king f2. That's going to end in this draw here, stalemate. Okay, that's actually one of the positions reached in the last video. So yeah, king f4, king d4. Which choice did I just go through there? I went through king f3, didn't I there? What if black instead pushed the h pawn, h3? Well, then you could play rook f8 check. This might be a sneakier try for black, actually, to be honest, because it looks at first like they've got their king in a silly spot. But actually, it's quite hard to stop the pawns promoting, and you do need a small tactic to do it. King e4, h2, rook g8 check, king h3, and now, very nice move this, king f4. How about that? If you push the G pawn, you get mated. And if you do anything else, we're going to, well, Rook H8 check sort of coming regardless, isn't it? I think you've got H1 equals queen, and white would have to take that queen with their rook, and then take the G pawn. Or if King G2, you've got the tail hook. In fact, even better than that. Sorry, I've just noticed the engine pointing out. You've got Rook takes G3 check. So maybe this was the best move. And there you go. That was sort of a tail hook in action. So yeah, that got into endgame books for ages. King F4, and after King D4, it doesn't really matter what black does. We've seen the various ways in which white can draw this position. But back to the original position, and sort of astonishing, really, given it's sort of a concept that we've covered with rook ending, or rook versus pawn endings, and covered in king and pawn endings. You know, the top players at the time would absolutely have been aware of a concept that needs using here, but for some reason decided not to look at it in this particular position. And it's the concept of shouldering. Okay. They probably didn't look at this King E4, which in all those lines we looked at a minute ago, white's had it because they can't get their king in. They needed to play King D4 now, and they can't. Probably the reason they didn't look at this is because it seems to drop the H pawn straight away, and then all white's got to do is take the G pawn afterwards. But this is the Saavedra position. Oops. And you go up the F file until white's run out of space. You didn't have to go that way. Could have gone that way. We've covered the Saavedra position to death. It would have been most entertaining if the white king was on... where would the white king need to be? It needs to be on H. If I got it the wrong way around. Would have been most entertaining if I'd remembered where the white king... Feels like the white king needs to be on H8. But for the entertaining bit where you get that stalemate trick going on. Anyway, or maybe that was when the pawn was on the F file. Ignore all that. Just ignore it. I think it would have to be on I8, wouldn't it? Where were we? Yeah, so King E4 wins the game for black. Well done if you found it. Next, yeah, lots to say on this. This is a game from 1976, and pause the video if you like and decide what you'll do as black. There's a very easy win using one of the concepts that we should all just know on rook versus two connected pass pawns, and it wasn't played in the game. And the very easy win is just King D7, and you're threatening C2. I mean, what does white even try? Rook A7 check, and we just come down the D file. It's just completely over. Okay, these two pawns are going to be unstoppable against the rook, and in fact the king's not even supporting them. That very easy win wasn't played, but this King D5, which was played, doesn't chuck the game away. White comes across with King F5. This is a good idea. Shouldering the black king. We're going to try some checks and force the black king this way. In the game, black now chucked it away with C2. Okay. Rook D8 check, King C4, King E4, and they agree to draw there. You can see we're just sort of keeping on shoving the black king that way. C1 can't be played because the rook will just pick it off, and I think black would have to be careful not to lose that. Yeah, that is losing for black if they push anything with C1. Into rook versus pawn, we're sort of black still one move away from the white to play as a win, black to play as a draw mantra that I kept going on about in the rook versus pawn videos. So yeah, back in this position, where was it? Where black played c2. Black hasn't chucked away the win just yet, but it's about to get complicated. So here black should play b3. And then when the black king gets checked, that was it. There's a good backstory to this. Okay, so yeah, so the game didn't go like that. I've just remembered what actually happened. King f5 was played and the game was adjourned. Petrosian was white in this game back in 1976, and he went up to his opponent. I'm sure with good intent, believing what he then said to be true. I'm sure he wasn't just sort of tricking him with the following analysis. So I think that he said, oh yeah, if c2, I just do this check and that's going to be a draw. So they didn't agree a draw there. This is just one of the lines that Petrosian showed him. But he also said, well, okay, if you do this b3 move, then I will play rook d8 check, and the game will go like this. You'll go king c4, I bring my king into e4, b2, check, king there, check, king there. I've got the tail hook. Okay. So he showed him that. He showed him the b3 line, showed him the c2 line, showed him it in an endgame book that was around at the time, all analysed by Avabacker and stuff. And his opponent just sort of said, yeah, okay, let's just have a draw. And he couldn't see anything either. But whether he did that sort of with a slightly sneakily knowing that he wasn't being completely straight, which I don't know anything about the guy, but I guess it's doubtful. It seems a bit of a sneaky thing to do. He probably didn't realise either that in the middle of that analysis, after b3, I'll play rook d8 check, you go king c4, and blah blah blah, and that was all true. Black's got this move, king c5, which you wouldn't think of ordinarily. And the point is that white doesn't really want to come in and shoulder here, because white needs to be close enough to these pawns to do the tail hook. So white would now have to play something like rook c8 check, but then you can come to d4. You think, well, what's so good about this? And like I say, it's about to get complicated. Rook d8 check, and then you go off to e3. Okay. Rook b8, we push the b pawn, and after king e5. Well, yeah, no wonder that they didn't find this. After b5, you've got this king f3 move. What a crazy move. The problem you've got I suppose it's similar to Proke's trap. You want to push the c pawn, but the white king has got the opposition with your black king. So rook b3 check followed by rook takes b2, pinning your c2 pawn to your king. Would then follow. So the idea of king f3 is that you are now threatening c2. And you might think, well, white can just maintain the opposition, but now you can revert to plan B because the white king is too far away from the tail hook. So you can go king e2, king e4, king d1, king d3, c3, and we're going to get rook versus queen. It's still not finished. White can now play rook h8. What would you do? Well, you would knight with check and then queen. Just out of interest, by the way, and nothing to do with this video. In a previous video I was talking about promotions and wondering whether there was a verb to bishop or a verb to rook. And there is a verb, of course, to queen, which means to make a woman into the monarch of that country, but also means to make a pawn into a queen in chess. I've forgotten to look up to knight. There is obviously as a verb to knight, which we all know about, but I don't know if it means to make a knight in chess. There is a verb to bishop, which is to make somebody into a bishop, but it's not a verb you can use in chess, but I'm going to. And there is, of course, also a verb to rook, which means to swindle someone, but is not a verb you should use in chess. So I'm guessing from that you shouldn't use to knight in chess. So you might find that interesting. You might think, can you just stop talking about that stuff that I don't care about and get back to the chess, which I will do very soon, but I thought you might find that interesting. Regardless of whether they're allowed in English, I'm going to be using all 4 of them from now on as verbs with obvious meaning in chess. There you go. So what do you got to say about that? Anyway, where were we with this position? I think we'd finished it, hadn't we? Last one then. This is a game from 1996. This is really hard, this one. I didn't get this one at all. So yeah, this happened in a game in 1996 at the British Championships, I believe. I might remember that wrongly, but maybe not. And it's white to play. What would you do? Pause the video, have a think about it, see if you can come up with a move. So incredibly hard to draw this. There are actually 3 drawing moves, but they're all the same move, which kind of gives it away. What you need to do as white here is nothing. It just seems like, why would you do nothing here? Like, we've got all these pawns coming down the board. Like, doing nothing is one of the last things that I would think to do in this position. You'd have to, you know, even for it to occur to you at the board as an idea would be quite something, and then you've got to analyse it through. I suppose the only way you might arrive at doing nothing is you might see it leading a little bit to, oh, I suppose it does that, which gives me a slightly better than the other line which I've analysed and which is lost. So we can look at what happened in the game, which was lost quite quickly. And then we can think about why doing nothing would be an improvement on that. So in the game, Rook f7 check was played, which is a very natural move. It straight away wins the e-pawn. But then we have 2 connected passed pawns against the rook again, of course, g3. And after Rook h7, of course, if black pushes the h-pawn, we've got the tail hook. But in the game, black did not push the h-pawn. Black switched pole positions. And white's lost. And just resigned, in fact, there. What white would really like to do is stick the rook behind the g-pawn, and when black pushes the g-pawn, play king f2. I hope you can see why that's not possible. Okay. Or if black just plays king g2, we see a sort of a little dance to end the game. But black doesn't need to go into that little dance to end the game as a draw, because black's got the g2 push, because white can't play king f2. After having taken the black e-pawn on e4, hopefully you're starting to pick up on it now, where this is going, the white king could not play king f2. And it is for that reason that in an ideal world, white should have sat at the board and thought, well, what if I do nothing? Right, the black king could come back to f4. That's sort of going backwards, isn't it? Like if I go rook f7 check, the king can come to g2. It's a shame it didn't go to g3, because that looks like it's an easy draw, and in fact it is a draw from there. So if I do nothing, the black king can come back to f4. And I could do here's a sort of doing nothing. Black king can come back to f4. Check. Has to go to g3 and I take on e4. They can't push the h or the g pawn, because I will take their h pawn. And that king f4 was the only king move that holds on to the pawn. So really the only sensible thing that black could do here is push the e-pawn. And that's the bit where you possibly wouldn't think to do nothing, because it's just like, well, I've done nothing and great. Black's pawn's even closer to becoming a queen now. But remember, in the original position, check, king g2, king takes e4, and we wanted to play rook to g8 and then king f2. And we can't. It's not legal. So do nothing. Black pushes the e-pawn. That's actually an advantage to us, because now when we check the white king off the e-pawn, king takes e3, g3, and we're sorted. Rook h8, if h2, same tail hook that we saw before. And if king h2, rook back to g8. We either get the little dance or we get g2, king f2, and it's going to finish with a draw, some sort of stalemate. I think there's various ways that black can achieve the stalemate there. In fact, black has only one way to lose this, which is to knight instead of to, if you bishop, rook, I said this verb would be useful, black can bishop, rook or queen. They're still all draws. That's sort of an amusing, irrelevant side point. Let's go back to this rook f8 check. By the way, in the original position, I think it's possible. I think it's very, very hard to think to do nothing in this position. But if that once was on your radar, do it. What if I did nothing? How would that help me? It's like, well, rook f7 check, king g2, blah, blah, oh, that's lost because I can't get my king to f2. If I do nothing, really black's only sensible move is to play e3. It's like, oh, okay. Well, in that line, rook f8 check, and I'm going to get my king to f2. Okay, I haven't analysed this, but the other line's lost anyway. So there might be a draw there. Well, I don't know. You could play into it with without even having to worry about whether there was a draw here, because the other line was reasonably lost anyway. Maybe. You might disagree with that. You might think, well, you might say, well, this line's so lost that you may as well try the other one and hope. I suppose you could always hope black just goes into that tail hook and doesn't switch pole positions, maybe. So, I mean, it's subjective, isn't it, whether I'm right on that argument. Because if I'm wrong, it means you've got to analyse everything. And if you analysed everything, you would see there's a way to draw this as well, if the white king goes to e2. You play rook h8, and now let's look at the things that black could do. If king d2, then you swing your rook back over to a8. And we're going to be... well, in fact, just looking at black playing e2, we've got some sort of perpetual there, haven't we? Rook, king e1, king e3, king f1, and then we can take. Okay, so yeah, not obvious, but it is a draw. And if instead of king d2, king to f2, then we would check. King e2, you go rook back to h8, go around in circles, or king g1, you could play king takes e3, h2, then rook to a8. How about that for a move? So you are going to be doing the tail hook, but not from behind this time round. If you go rook h8 here, you don't get the tail hook because black plays g3 straight away. Okay. So if we go back to rook a8, if black queen straight away, you can take that queen and play king f4. And if instead of queening, black plays g3, then you can go check, king g2, and you've still got the tail hook. The rook is earmarked for the h-pawn, and the king has latched onto the g-pawn. I think that was an incredibly hard position for white to try and find anything there. In particular, analyse, even if they had found the idea of doing nothing. The other two ways of doing nothing, by the way, are rook h6 and rook h5. Although the rook h5 king f4 line then creates another spanner in the works, because you can't bring your rook to the f file with check. So rook h8 is the obvious place to put it. But even if white had thought of the doing nothing line, with the idea that now if king g2, our king can get to f2 in one of those variations, they would have also had all this to analyse, which, I mean, there's still a lot of different moves going on there. So really, really hard position. I can say one thing though. you'd stand no chance at all if you didn't have knowledge of the tail hook, switching pole positions, and even we saw in that particular game, one of the variations involved the sort of the power of the rook checking from the side. Anyway, I think that's enough on rook versus two connected passed pawns and harder positions. I'm going to do another video which is still rook versus two connected passed pawns, but this time it's on a different angle. It's all about the side with the rook who is just absolutely lost, but they've got checkmate threats as a sort of salvation. And there's some fantastic positions, some really clever positions. They look like studies, but they're from games. So yeah, I'm looking forward to making that video.